Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is award winning author, and of course, a best selling author too, no other than Mr. Harry Turtledove.
Hello,
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Harry, and can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Harry Turtledove. I'm an escaped Byzantine historian. I write science fiction. Much of it is alternate history, including the book we're mostly going to talk about today. I write fantasy. A lot of it is historically based. And when I can get away with it, I write historical fiction too. I've been selling since 1977. I've been making a living as a writer since 1991.
Congratulations, Mr. Harry, and what is the privilege of being an author?
Well, I get to work out of my house. I have very few people telling me what to do. I pretty much get to do what I want as long as I want to keep writing and keep eating.
Definitely, indeed. So, what age did you realize that you're good in writing?
Oh, I've known since I was probably in junior high, that I could write some, and I started trying, and eventually I started making money at it. And it definitely beats working for a living, especially if you live in Los Angeles and have to commute across town to your day job.
Definitely. Who are your favorite authors that influence you the most?
Well, the author who made me what I am today is L. Sprague de Camp. I found his book, Lest Darkness Fall, in a secondhand bookstore near my house when I was 14 or 15 years old. And it got me interested in studying Byzantine history. And if I hadn't found that book when I found it, let's see, my life would be entirely different. I wouldn't have written what I've written. I would have written something because I was already interested in writing. I wouldn't be married to the lady that I'm married to because I met her when I was teaching at UCLA while the professor under whom I studied had a guest gig in Greece. I wouldn't have the kids I have. I wouldn't be living where I'm living. I wouldn't be talking with you about my new novel right now. You know, other than that, it didn't change my life a bit. Finding that book was sort of alternate history on the micro historical level. If I hadn't found it when I found it, my whole life would be different now.
Certainly. So, Mr. Harry, why Byzantine era? Why you fascinated with it?
Well, I read Lest Darkness Fall, and I started trying to find out how much L. Sprague de Camp, the man who wrote it, was making up and how much was real. And I got more and more interested. My original intention was to be a scientist, but I flunked out of Caltech at the end of my freshman year because I severely couldn't do calculus. And so I was looking for something else to do, and I wound up doing Byzantine history.
Okay, sounds interesting, Mr. Harry. You have also pen name. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I've had a couple over the years. The one you're probably referring to is Eric G. Iverson. When I sold my very first novel back in the 70s, my publisher looked at my last name, which is Turtledove, and which is an unusual last name, and they said, no one will believe this name is real, even though it is. And we're going to change your name to Eric Iverson. I liked that so well that I gave myself a middle initial when I wrote as Eric Iverson. The middle initial was G, and it stood for goddamn. Uh,
Okay.
I thought, I thought this might be useful because I could publish fiction under the pen name and academic nonfiction under my own name. However, a couple of things happened. First, I didn't publish a whole lot of academic nonfiction. I've done one academic book and 4 or 5 articles. And the other thing that happened was that I sold 4 books of Byzantine-based fantasy to Lester Del Rey. And I wanted to publish them as by Eric G. Iverson. And he said, no, if you want to stay Iverson, I won't buy them. I want you to be Turtledove. People will remember that. So I may be the only writer around who's had his pen name and his own name imposed on him by force.
Together. So what do you think? It really helped you as an author or it make you more confused?
Uh, I've always been confused. So that's, it's not the writing. But I like to do it. I like telling stories. I like working on my own. I'm, on the autism spectrum, probably not real far from the neurotypical end, but I'm there. So I work very nicely by myself. I tell myself what to do. I do it. And with luck, people pay me money for it.
Definitely. So, Mr. Harry, what books or authors are you currently reading or recommend?
Right now, I'm reading several books by a fellow who wrote a lot in the 60s and 70s. His name was G.C. Edmondson. He wrote science fiction and he wrote westerns, and he's just fun.
What are your short term and long term goals in writing?
To tell us the best story that I can to make people want to read the words I write. What else does a writer ever want to do?
Before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening to my ranking tops in the last 30 days because in Uganda, I got number 13 on the Apple chart, Egypt at number 16, Nepal at number 21, Slovenia 42, Indonesia at 44, Nigeria 51, Morocco at 68, and a lot more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Mr. Harry Turtledove. So, Mr. Harry, let's talk about your latest novel, The Wages of Sin. How did you craft it?
Well, it's set in 1850s England in a world where HIV got loose in the early 1500s and for survival's sake caused massive social changes in humanity, basically all over the world, because the only way in a world without modern medicine that you can avoid getting AIDS is either not to screw at all or to be strictly monogamous. And both of those things go dead against human nature. And the book is about the conflict between desire and the desire to stay safe and the desire to get your rocks off, basically.
What was the writing process like for this book, The Wages of Sin?
Well, I am old enough to have lived through the HIV epidemic of the 80s. I remember what that did to the gay community in the United States. One of the fellows I went to graduate school with died in 1986 in his early 40s. And I thought, let's apply that to the entire world. How do you avoid catching HIV? You either don't screw or you only screw one person who doesn't have it. And how easy is that is it going to be to make that happen, and what sort of social changes are going to be necessary to make it happen most of the time anyhow, because nothing is going to be perfect. And that's, and that was the story I was telling.
Definitely. How did you come up with the title of your book?
There is a line from the Bible: the wages of sin is death. And that seems very appropriate for a book about HIV.
Definitely. Can you describe the main characters or themes in your book that
The,
readers can look forward to?
the two main characters are Viola Williams. She's a doctor's daughter. Her fiance is Peter Drinkwater. His father, a lawyer, is the doctor's best friend. So they're joining two closely, friendly families together. And Peter is going off to London from Salisbury, where he lives, to study law, as his father did before him. And the problem with going off to London is that even in this changed world, London is a big city and has all of the temptations that a big city has. And if you mess around and indulge in temptation, is anybody back home going to want anything to do with you? And that's what the book is about.
Interesting. Mr. Harry, did you draw from any personal experiences when you crafting the story or characters?
Oh, you always do. Characters are made up of pieces of you and pieces of people you know and pieces of people you've read about. So yeah, oh sure. That's inevitable when you're writing.
100%, right? What do you hope readers will take away from your book after they finish reading it?
Well, I hope they will take away a couple of hours of entertainment. I hope they will take away a little bit of thought. I hope they will give thought to how badly women are treated, even in our own world, and how it could have been much, much worse. And that's what I'm talking about in the book.
Definitely. Were there any particular authors or books that influenced your writing style or the content of The Wages of Sin?
Well, I don't know about that book in particular, but the two writers who have influenced me most are probably L. Sprague de Camp, whom I've mentioned before, and also Poul Anderson, another science fiction writer.
That's interesting. How important was research in creating the world context of The Wages of Sin?
Well, you always have to try to make a world that doesn't seem as if it will disappear when the writer isn't looking at part of it. And you try to make a world that feels lived in, that feels as if it could be real, and that also lets you look at the world that is real in a way that you couldn't look without changing things.
Definitely. What message or lesson, if any, would like your book to impart to the readers?
It's a story made to entertain. It's not particularly made to teach. You may think a little bit about the way things are, and that may, and reading it may change your view of the way things are a little bit. But I'm really not trying to teach anybody anything. I'm trying to tell an interesting story.
Very well said, Mr. Harry. Is there a specific scene or chapter in the book that holds special meaning to you?
Well, my main female character, Viola Williams, is a writer, which is one of the things that women can do in this world, even in the isolated way that they're forced to live. And some of her experiences are based on some of my experiences when I was first starting to write. So I think that, that probably rings true.
Certainly, Mr. Harry. So, the wages of sin, how do you think stands out in its genre or category?
I don't know. I hope I write pretty well. I've been doing I've been doing this for a long time. I hope I have some idea how to do it by now.
Definitely. There's a trademark for you, right?
I hope it's
So
it's it's let me avoid honest work for a good many years now.
definitely. So, Mr. Harry, before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the best five-star restaurant in downtown Toronto. Plus one more, our books are out, not only one, but 13 volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics, until 12 is only the books that you need. How to create a delicious food, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Harry Wages of Scene, what is the best highlight?
Probably when Viola discovers that Peter has been messing around where he shouldn't. She's not pleased.
Oh, that's really interesting. Not please, people. So, Mr. Harry, what advice would you give to aspiring authors who are looking to embark on their own writing journeys?
Well, you've got to read a lot. That's always the first thing. Then when you write, you try to imitate the kinds of things that you like to read. And if you keep doing it, you get better at it. And eventually you will develop a style that isn't so much derived from somebody else's, but that is your own. And if you keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and you need to, because it will take a while before you succeed, eventually you'll get there.
Definitely. Mr. Harry, if you describe your own style of writings, what is it?
Accurate, I hope.
Yes, people, Mr. Harry is accurate. Can you share any interesting anecdotes or behind the scenes stories related to the book creation?
Well, I can talk about if I can talk about my writing in general, if you want, if that's what you're after.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, I am one of the few, although there are some others, professional writers who still does a first draft in longhand. I don't type it.
Oh, wow.
And, and the reason for that is that I'm an old guy, and I go back to the days when you wrote on a typewriter. And back in those days, if you made a mistake, you either X'd it out, or you pulled the paper out and retyped and then tried to do it right. And instead of doing the endless retyping, I started writing the parts I was having trouble with in longhand till I got them the way that I wanted them, and then I would transcribe them. And after a while, I thought, this is telling me something. So I started doing first drafts in longhand. For me, and I'm not saying this works for other people, but for me, it makes my style tighter, and it saves me a fair amount of rewriting.
Yes. Interesting fact from you, Mr. Harry. So, how has your writing evolved over time?
I think my style is probably a little simpler than it was when I first started out. I don't know why exactly, but I just, I try to say things in the simplest words that say just what I want them to say.
Definitely. How do you handle feedback or criticism of your work?
Uh, I try not to pay too much attention to it as long as I'm doing well enough to sell, I'm pretty happy.
Definitely. Right, 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 right.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yes. How do you think the publishing industry is changing and what does it mean for an author?
Well, one of the things that's happened is that the big publishers are less interested in what used to be called mid-list books. They want blockbusters all the time. And
Yes.
if you don't hit big, you don't hit. And that's a problem.
So do you think nowadays comparing for the publishing industry is more better now?
It's certainly different. I'm not sure I would say better. I would say different. Just
Very well said, Mr. Harry. So what role do social media and online platforms play in your writing career?
well, I have an active Twitter account. I am at HN Turtledove, and I talk about my books there, and I try to sell people my books there, and I provide helpful links so that people can buy them there. And I have, it has definitely helped get word out about what I'm doing. So I think it's great.
Definitely to spread the good writing of Mr. Harry Turtledove. Wages of Scene is good for a series or a motion picture.
I hope so. I always hope so. I've had some things optioned. I've never had anything produced yet.
Mr. Harry, what is something you wish you had known when you are first started writing?
What I was doing?
What you're doing is right, right? Definitely for sure. So, how do you hope your books will be remembered or appreciated by future generations?
Oh, if I'm remembered at all, I'll be happy.
Yes,
I mean, there, in any time, there are an awful lot of people doing things, and only a few of them get remembered. I hope I'm good enough.
definitely. Which one of your books is your favorite?
I never answer that question. It's like asking me which of my children is my favorite.
So, which book is the hardest to write?
Oh, I probably my book Ruled Britannia, which is about England after the Armada succeeded in conquering it, and the English are trying to rebel. And I was trying to write early 17th century English, and that is not an easy thing to do.
Yes, definitely. So, which book of yours easy to write?
The one I probably had the most fun writing is a very silly fantasy called Every Inch a King. It's set in a world, it's a fantasy story, but it's based on something that might almost have happened just before the First World War, when a German acrobat claimed that he was the king of Albania for 5 days. He closely resembled the man the Albanians really wanted as king, who was a Turkish prince. He also spoke Turkish because he'd served in the Turkish army. And so he went to Albania, he says, was crowned, had fun in the harem, declared war on neighboring Montenegro, and departed with most of Albania's treasury in his back pocket. This was probably about $5, but what can you do? And he dined out on this story for the rest of his life, even though it doesn't seem to have been true. But I wrote the fantasy book as if it were true, and it's very silly.
But fun.
I hope so.
It's fun to write. So, Mr. Harry, if you give five adjectives of the wages of sin, what is it or what are they?
uh, Gloomy,
Yes.
uh, grim, hopeful in the end. I'll just leave it there.
Mr. Harry, can you please invite our listeners to support your upcoming novel, The Wages of Sin?
Well, I think that everybody in the whole entire world should go rush right out and buy it. I mean, obviously.
Yes, please, people, let's support Mr. Harry Turtledove because if you support him, of course, more books to come.
That's right.
Thank you, Listen Notes, for my latest score of 26 and belong to 10% popular show globally, and Feedspot for being the number two best book podcast on the planet and number one in the art category. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast. So, Mr. Harry, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Talk with you next week.
Moricon people, see you soon.